Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Wednesday, June 12th. Derek and Riper here with Keith Law. Keith, of course, is a senior writer covering baseball at The Athletic. Keith, thank you so much for joining me.
Your name rings a bell. Have we talked before?
Yeah, it's almost like we used to do a show on Fridays. That show still exists. Stephen Nesbitt's the pilot these days, but
he's okay. Yeah,
he's a good guy.
Yeah.
So
I guess
if you're not listening, if you're not listening to the Wind-Up, listen to the Wind-Up. Stephen Nesbitt, Chad Jennings, lots of guests rotating through on Fridays. But it's been a minute since we had a chance to catch up, Keith, and it's been a fun season so far. A lot of unique twists, and I think the biggest one for me is the run environment being so challenging. And I think that creates some misconceptions, perhaps, about the rookies in particular. So we're going to talk about rookie pitchers who are having success, some rookie bats who have struggled early on, talk about some prospect movers from your latest prospect rankings update, and a few prospects coming up in the MLB draft, which is just about a month away now. It's coming up quick.
It is less than 5 weeks, right? So I'm working on my next mock, and it's coming quick. And I think I speak for a lot of us in the industry where it's like, it can't really come quick enough. Like, this draft class is not great. And I think I'm already hearing a lot of fatigue from folks who've been on the road, and I share it too, where it's like, let's get this one done and look at next year. Next year can't be worse. I think it's better. But this year is really, we could talk about it more, but this year's just, it ain't good. Especially if you have to get past the first few names, it does. I guess people can't see, but yeah, it does a nosedive pretty quickly.
Heck, let's do it. Let's start with the draft. Why not?
Sure.
I think every class has quality big leaguers in it. It's just a question of depth many times, right? And the question is, how do you find quality big leaguers in a thin class? We'll start at the very top. It sounds like it's a 1-2 toss-up for some folks. Charlie Condon versus Travis Bazzana. Which direction would you go if you had to pick, and which direction do you think the Guardians are actually going to go since they have that spot?
Sure. So, let me step back a little bit. So for folks who don't follow the draft a ton, just real quick, these are two college position players who've had unbelievable seasons. Condon, an outfielder who's also played third base. He's mostly played center field for Georgia. Bazzana, second baseman who's Australian, born and raised, went to all the way through high school in Australia, then came over here to Oregon State. I would argue the two best performances by position players in college this year. They are both Golden Spikes finalists. Condon set the modern home run record for a single season. So since the NCAA changed the bats about 12, 13 years ago, you could see how home run totals went down immediately. He has now set the new record. The ball was flying this spring, so take that with a tiny grain of salt, but he's super, super talented. And it's power, it's athleticism, it's size. He's 6'6", he's lean, he moves well. He played a capable center field. I'm sure he's probably going to end up in a corner in the long term, or could go back to third base potentially, but athletic enough that there's going to be some value there. But I also know some scouts who aren't totally sold on the hit tool and sort of the way he goes about it. And some other folks have pointed out he's got a huge home road split this year. He did a tremendous amount of his damage at home at Georgia. It's not a fatal flaw, but it's just a variable you want to consider when evaluating players. He's the upside guy for me, whereas Bazzana is, you want to get the sure-ish thing, and I say that because there's just no sure things ever. I could list sure things who weren't. But Bazzana, he can really hit. Everybody is convinced he's going to hit. He's going to stay at second base. It's not going to be great, but he will work to make himself at least adequate at second base. And he's come into some power. And I don't think it's going to be 25, 30 homer power in pro ball, but he's going to hit the ball hard enough that the batting average is going to hold up and that there's going to be something beyond just batting average. It's just not going to be an empty 280. He's going to get some doubles damage, a few balls in the seats, be able to draw his walks. He's going to be a complete enough player. It's not to say I don't think Bazzana can be a star, but I think that Condon has more upside. There's more potential that you are getting the all-world, maybe MVP type player. With the caveat that I don't know that either of these guys would even have been a top 5 prospect a year ago when we had one of the best draft classes of my entire career, where we had obviously Skenes, Langford, and if you don't know Dylan Cruz, you probably will pretty soon. Those are 3 of the top 5 picks right there, along with 2 elite high school players in Max Clark and Walker Jenkins. Those guys were the first 5 last year. They might have been the first 5 even if you put Condon or Bazzana in the draft class last year. So just keep in mind, we are starting at a slightly lower level here. You also asked, what do I think Cleveland's going to do? The betting has been all along that they will do the best deal for them in that whatever their little group of players is, and no one knows for sure. Cleveland does not, they really don't divulge much, if any, information until the very last minute. But my guess is they'll pick their 2 or 3 guys and make offers to several of them. And whoever takes the lowest bonus will be the pick so that they can reallocate some of the savings from their bonus pool to subsequent picks. In a lot of years, I would say that's a good approach. I'm a little hesitant to say that this year because the high school class, particularly the high school position player class this year, is really poor. And I don't know that you're getting those first round talents when you pick again if you're Cleveland. And they pick, it's like 6th or 7th in each round. I don't have the draft order in front of me. They won the lottery to get the first overall pick, but that's not their pick in all subsequent rounds. So by the time they come up again and again and again, I think a lot of the players they might want to pay are going to be gone. And you have to take that into account. That's great that you save the money as long as the players you wanted to give it to are still available. If you save money by taking a lesser player at 1 and then you pick again and all the guys you wanted are gone, there's no way to undo it. You're already locked in.
I think the other part of this too is Cleveland seems like a very model-centric team. They seem to look at things a little bit differently than a lot of other organizations. They also have a player profile type in their system of middle infielders.
Yes.
And Travis Bazzana sounds more like a Guardians type than Charlie Condon to me. Again, that might not matter at the end of the day, given those factors.
You're not wrong. And in fact, the joke coming into the year was they were going to take West Virginia infielder J.J. Weatherholt because he was a short middle infielder who can hit. Now, Weatherholt has had 2 significant hamstring injuries now in the last 12 months. And, the general belief is that Cleveland, being also, I think, fairly conservative when it comes to things like medicals, because they've been burned a few times, they probably wouldn't go that direction if you pick 1. Or if you pick 7, that's a different story. I think if you're, I think St. Louis is 7. If you're sitting at 7, J.J. Weatherholt's there, and people were talking about him as 1-1 coming into the year, and the issue is health, not some sort of deterioration of skill. I would take that guy and pop champagne. But that was the joke, right? Cleveland was like, they have a type, right? Who's the shortest middle infielder they can take? Well, that's right. Well, Bazzana might sort of be that guy. It's a little unfair but like these players are also very talented. They're not reaching down and taking a guy who stinks just because he fits a profile. They have a profile, and these guys are also pretty good. But I agree with you. I think in the first mock I did, I gave them Bazzana, and I would probably do the same thing right now. I mean, we'll see. I have a week to finish it, but we'll see what I hear. But definitely my gut says they'll take Bazzana because it's the sure thing. It's the player archetype that they really know and like. And then they'll probably go after – they also have another type on the pitching side where they like to go after those guys later in the draft, right, where they're looking for the Tanner Bibbies and the Shane Biebers. There are some of those guys kicking around out there. I'm not necessarily going to tell you I know who they are, but they exist because they're in every draft. Those command guys, good delivery, got some characteristics on the fastball maybe that the team likes, that the model likes, and they're like, we can help those guys. But we don't have to take them in the first round. We can take them in the 4th round. We can take them in the 5th round. And they've had pretty good success with those guys so far. So that's the other thing I think that you'll see too is whatever Cleveland does, maybe they do save some of that money. Instead of going after high school guys, maybe they say, we got a couple college command guys we particularly like, and we're just going to offer them some extra money to make sure we get them.
You had Nick Kurtz, first baseman out of Wake, I think 3rd on your latest rankings from this class. I find it challenging if I were calling the shots for a team with an early pick to choose a first baseman that early. Like that actually seems pretty risky. So do you think the bat, I mean, you must, if you have him 3rd, even in a weak class, you have to have a lot of faith in the bat overall. What type of ceiling do you think Nick Kurtz has as a hitter as he advances against top-level pitching?
I think he has good ceiling. I think the issue, I agree with your philosophical concern, and I would say that is the problem is the floor is Andrew Vaughn. I mean, I've brought this up a few times, especially because when I saw Kurtz last year and early this year, he was passive. He was taking to take. And hey, look, everyone, especially anybody with an internet connection, they love to look at the stat line. This guy walks a lot. He walks more than he strikes out. Look at his on-base percentage. Hey, on-base percentage is great. But we're talking about on-base percentage in the big leagues, right? Having a great on-base percentage in college is an indicator of something, but it may not be an indicator that it's going to be high on-base percentage in the big leagues necessarily. And Andrew Vaughn is a great example of that. Andrew Vaughn was a super disciplined hitter at college, and he can't buy a walk at this point. And I mean, he kind of stinks. Like, I looked at, he hit his 7th home run the other day. I'm like, 7 home runs, that's not that great. Oh, and his on-base percentage is 280. So yeah, the floor for a first baseman who doesn't actually hit the way you think he's going to hit is kind of zero at this point, right? That is a replacement level player. And I do think you have to be mindful of that with a guy like Kurtz. Now, to his credit, he suffered in about a week after I saw him, a shoulder injury, missed a week or so. He was back pretty quickly and then went off. And it was like, I don't know, got hit up, guy like gets bonked on the head, changes his personality, right? All of a sudden he was like, I'm swinging. And he hit something, I think it was 7 homers in 8 games or something. It was like, that's it. That's the guy. Because he does have bat speed. He does have power. So the argument for Kurtz is if he hits, right, it's average, it's on base, and it's 25 homer power in a capable first baseman. So, there's not much positional or defensive value, but the bat will profile there. So to me, he is more in that Condon group where you could hit it pretty big, but the floor is pretty low, right? There's the chance that because if the bat doesn't pan out, you don't have much, and you don't even have the positional value that Condon might offer, which is why I still have him below there. Again, it's a guy a year ago. I'm not taking Kurtz over any of the top 5 guys from last year. It's just in this year we don't have a Paul Skenes and we don't have a Wyatt Langford.
Yeah, everyone always wants there to be players like that who are quick impact players, who are future stars, and we're just not that lucky year in and year out.
Right.
There's another toss-up. Couple college pitchers, Chase Burns out of Wake, Hagen Smith out of Arkansas. Curious which way you lean between these two. Got them right next to each other in the ranks, but I mean, what do you think plays a little better at the big league level out of these two guys' arsenals?
And I will say, I think it's a toss-up if you talk to scouts, folks who've seen them both, scouts, directors, people who've seen them a lot. I saw them both this spring. I've actually seen Smith each of his 3 years at Arkansas. I saw Burns as a freshman at Tennessee, not last year. He was bounced from Tennessee's rotation, transferred to Wake Forest, and became their number 1 starter. I personally lean towards Burns because I think he does it a little better mechanically. I think it is going to be a little more sustainable. And because Smith has already had 1 Tommy John surgery and Burns has not had a major injury yet. And I do think that is a factor. I'm not taking a guy off the board because he's had 1 Tommy John, but we're looking for fine distinctions between players. How do we separate these two guys? Smith, the primary argument for Smith is he's left-handed, and that he has, since he had Tommy John surgery in high school, his progression over the 3 years at Arkansas is textbook. This is what we used to think players would do, right? Before we got into this mindset that they all got to throw 96 coming out of high school. Smith was, I think, 88, 92 when I saw him as a freshman, and then picked up a little velocity last year. And then he comes out this year and suddenly he's bumping 99, and the slider is a wipeout pitch. And he had an outing against Oregon State where people were saying that was Kerry Wood. That was Randy Johnson. That's the best pitching performance I've ever seen by a college player. I may never see something like that again. Yeah, that counts. That's pretty good. And I imagine if I had seen that particular outing in late February, maybe I would have Smith higher. Like, I recognize that the power of seeing something like that in person, just seeing just how dominant it is, which is not something you can get off video, certainly not out of a box score, that might sway me. I happen to get a more dominant outing actually out of Burns, where in his second to last pitch of the day, my daughter happened to be with me, and I turned to her, I said, pick up the radar gun. She goes, why? I said, because he's going to hit 100 here. Because it was 2 strikes, 6th inning, guys on base. I'm like, he is going to air it out. And sure enough, he hit 100 for the first time, and the ump missed the call. I was like, really? Did you not get the script?
That's amazing.
So it was just one of those, like, yep, this is what guys like Chase Burns do. This is how you know you're dealing with someone who's got that extra level of not just ability, but competitiveness. I mean, I think he punched out 15 or 16. It was one of those, you walk out, yeah, I saw a thing. It's one of those starts I'm going to talk about for years. So I get it. Is that what's swaying me? That's quite possible. The in-person, the bias of just getting a better start from him than I got from Smith. Smith was good when I saw him. Very good. Burns was on another level.
knowing that these guys are not quite on the same level as Paul Skenes, it's unfair to expect them to be in the big leagues by this time next year. That's absurd. But I do think we're hitting a point where teams seem to trust pitching prospects a lot faster than they used to. And some of that comes back to, I mean, by all accounts, Wake Forest has an incredible pitching lab, right?
Yes, they do.
So if you are becoming a pro and you're spending time at Wake, you are learning at a very high level, and you're going to be much more prepared for professional baseball than you would be going through some other programs out there that don't quite have the same setup, or especially compared to high school arms who are so much further away. So, I mean, I think this is kind of like okay in the long run, because spending time year over year in the minors when you have major league caliber stuff or near major league caliber stuff is not good for your arm health. It's not good for your career. It's not good for you as a pitcher, right? You're wasting maybe some of your prime years potentially and not getting paid. So what's a reasonable timetable for Burns and Smith to actually be in the big leagues, not even knowing which organizations are going to turn to him? Because I think this is a league-wide shift where teams are being a lot more aggressive with pitching, in part because it's a little easier to see what major league stuff looks like now. And I think they've also shortened up the development time because of the evolution of labs and the improvement of coaching and off-season facilities that players now have access to.
Oh, I agree with everything you just said, and maybe more strongly. Like, I actually think Smith and Burns, if healthy, are probably in the big leagues by next year's draft. Like, I think you take those guys with the full intention that we're moving them fast. Like, I just pulled up Rhett Lauder, who was the second pitcher taken last year. He got to AA by mid-May, had actually a couple of rough outings to start. Now his last 3 outings have been much more Rhett Lauder. More strikes, more swing and miss, fewer walks. Actually only walked 2 now in his last 3 starts. He was giving up a lot of hard contact, and I think that's just the jump in level, right? AA hitters are better. You can't just put stuff by them. Looks like he's already made an adjustment. I just talked to a scout the other day who saw him and said, yeah, this guy's, if he's not ready for the big leagues, he's super close to being ready for the big leagues. That's why you take those top end college starters. They should get to AA really quickly, especially because A-ball kind of stinks right now. The caliber of a typical A-ball lineup, high or low, it's just not very high. If you're coming out of the ACC or SEC, it's not much of a challenge. And God, we saw that with Skenes. We're seeing it now with Lauder. We're seeing it with a lot of the advanced college starters. They're just ripping through. We're seeing it with guys who aren't even that good as college starters, but they can pitch and they can just dominate A-ball lineups. Then they get to AA, and suddenly the reality bill has to be paid. But I think with Burns, Smith, Trey Savage at East Carolina, who is probably going to be the third college starter taken. He's another one where you're just moving him real fast. There's this mentality, they don't have a ton of bullets, so why have them waste it in the minors, potentially get hurt? If they're that close to being ready, we can work with them in the big leagues. We can get them to the big league with the big league coaching staff. We can get value out of them sooner. Also, this more you push them up the system, assuming they continue to perform, they have trade value. So if you're a contender, right? Cleveland's a contender. Okay, they're not taking him, but hypothetically, they could take a player now thinking we could trade him this offseason, or we could trade him next year at the trade deadline, because if he's not in the majors, he's going to be super close. So I think this is a real shift where the top college starters are all going to move through the low minors very quickly. And maybe that's not getting to the big leagues within a year, although I think Burns and Smith could do it. I think it's going to be getting them to AA or above within a year, so that they're either on the cusp of helping the big league club or they've immediately established some trade value.
How do hitters keep up? There's so much more, it seems like, going into pitching development. It's not that we're not trying to develop bats as well. It just seems like pitching is moving faster.
Yeah, I agree.
So what are position players supposed to do? We have these lofty expectations that guys that are 21, 22 years old are going to come up and hit some of the nastiest big league pitching we've ever seen. Mm-hmm. And it creates this disconnect where, Wyatt Langford didn't just hit the ground running now. Jackson Churio is struggling a little bit. And big league teams have to find a balance. Like the contending teams especially, I think, are in a really tough spot right now with their top prospects because, you're weighing your options within your organization. Who's the next outfielder on the depth chart of AAA that plays if Jackson Churio goes down? That player might be a quad A sort of guy. Mm-hmm. And then how important is it to get Jackson Churio's future optimized to the point of making sure he's challenged? If you send him down to AAA right now, where correct me if I'm wrong. Is this as bad as AAA has ever been? It was already trending in the wrong direction 2 or 3 years ago when we started doing the pods on Fridays, but it seems like it's as bad as it's ever been. So how do you fix someone? The Tigers are doing it with Spencer Torkelson. How do you fix Spencer Torkelson at AAA against suboptimal pitching? It seems like an impossible ask right now.
Yeah, it's AAA is not good. I mean, the minors just aren't good, right? The gap between we had been talking about this for 3 years now. And Ken Rosenthal wrote a piece a couple weeks ago, and it nothing against Ken, but people are like, well, Ken wrote this. It's like, I've been saying this for years, like, because I go to the games, because I talk to the people who go to the games. Like, we know this. It has gotten worse. It got worse after the pandemic because more than anything else, because Major League Baseball eliminated all the short season leagues. And so a lot of those guys who would have been in short season leagues, but our prospects got pushed up into full season ball, squeezing out players who maybe weren't necessarily prospects, but improved the overall caliber of competition because they were older, more experienced, wiser, had to find ways to continue to survive because they weren't as athletically gifted, for example. And that has actually trickled upwards all the way through the minors, where I think all 4 of the full season levels are worse than they used to be. I think it's most pronounced at the lower levels, but yeah, it turns out AAA is not as good of a warm-up practice runway to get someone, to get a hitter, especially to the big leagues. And we're seeing this time and again. If you send Jackson Merrill down, that's not going to do anything for him. He's going to go down and rake, right? Jackson Holiday, I mean, I understand there were more factors there because in no small part because the Orioles have such a crazy surplus of position players who can hit. But I don't think Holiday's learning a whole lot now in AAA. He already showed he could hit at that level. Teams are going to have to get used to this idea that you're going to call up prospects, and even the best ones are going to struggle. And they might struggle badly like Holiday did. You have to have a lot more patience than you did. Be willing to give them more of a ramp to say, you might strike out half the time your first couple of weeks in the majors, and that's okay. And it's not going to get you sent down immediately. I think communicating that to the player is going to be a big part of this. And it is incumbent on the teams to know, okay, well, this guy's really, he's never going to figure it out, and this guy is. Like, there are some decisions that have to be made within that context, but we're seeing a lot of these top hitting prospects struggle on their first exposure to big league pitching because it's like nothing they've ever seen before, and certainly nothing they've ever seen consistently before. And that is, causing a lot of them to struggle, even though I still think Wyatt Langford's going to be a star. I still think Jackson Holiday's going to be a star. I still think Churio's going to be a star. Turns out none of them's really had a great start to their big league careers this year. And that's, I think, an indicator of, name 3 of the top, 6 prospects in baseball coming into the year. I think that's an indicator of just how bad things are in the high minors.
Yeah, and it might take a season or even a season and a half to make those adjustments instead of a month or a half season. It used to take shorter windows of time for a lot of the top players, at least somewhat recently. That was the case, but I think it has changed because of the quality of pitching, among other things. Yeah. Jackson Merrill is having a lot of success right now as a 21-year-old who skipped AAA and only played 46 games at AA, and some of that was just by need. They needed someone who could play center field. So he moves off the dirt, plays center field, learns a new position defensively, comes up. He's only striking out 15% of the time. He's not getting to a ton of power yet, but you'll take a 96 WRC plus from someone in their first half season against big league pitching with so little experience in the upper levels of the minor leagues. This is a wildly successful outcome, even though it doesn't jump off the page and make you think he's a superstar right now. He still could develop into that type of player over time, given this foundation. Yeah,
I would agree with that. And he's a below average hitter, right? It's interesting. He's a below average hitter, but because he can play center field, he's actually been playing it very well, which is really impressive for a guy who had basically no experience off the dirt. That makes him an average to maybe slightly above average player. I just pulled up Baseball Reference. He's at a 1.5, a WAR, 1.5 WAR so far this year. So, even if he just maintains, if he doesn't improve, which you would like to think, a young player, more exposure, he will start to improve. He's got to cut down. He's chasing a lot. Which is not terribly surprising, right? He hasn't seen a lot of pitching of this caliber before. He's doing well when he stays within the zone. He's chasing. Even if he cuts that down, I could see him having a much better second half. He might be a 3-WAR player as a rookie. That's a great, great outcome, particularly given how many of these guys have struggled even guys who have had that upper minors experience facing the best pitching that the minor leagues have to offer. He didn't even get that and has managed to, like you said, have a pretty solid, to be close to an average hitter with above average defense at a position up the middle, that adds up to a really good player. I'm sort of trying to put his hitting in context and at the same time make sure I'm adequately addressing the fact that he is having a very good season overall.
I almost wonder if one of the counter adjustments for position players is spending more time becoming above average defenders, because that buys you time. If you're providing value in that facet of the game, your team can justify maybe 2 players in the lineup who are below average with the bat, but if they're above average with the glove and they do it at a premium position, that's okay. You don't need 1 through 9 hitters to all be league average or better. That's an unrealistic expectation for a major league lineup at this point. The other guy I wanted to ask you about is Colt Keith, because he's hit everywhere he's played. And I think he's a great example of just the difficulty of making those adjustments. Even just looking at his numbers in May compared to the first month of the season, it seemed like things were starting to fall into place. It doesn't necessarily show up in the full season results just yet. Still not getting to the power, but he's not striking out that much. He's not chasing a ton of pitches outside the zone. I think the Tigers are in one of those spots where they can be a little more patient because they're not expected to be a playoff team this year. But what do you see in Colt Keith, and what type of progression do you think we'll get from him as someone that really crushed pitching everywhere he played prior to his arrival?
Yes. And it's funny because he did have a great match. I had noticed a while ago. It's like, he's figuring some stuff out, right? That it's better contact quality. He's getting better results. And then he's 1 for 23 in June. So sorry, Colt. sorry, we jumped the gun a little bit. What has surprised me, I guess, a little bit, and we're still dealing with kind of modest samples. He is not striking out. He's not hitting the ball quite as hard as I expected. And I think as he did in the high minors. And Colt Keith's, I remember talking to a scout a year ago. It's like, what do you got on Keith's position? Because they were, I think this was around when there was like, well, he's a third baseman. They're going to try him at second. And the answer was his best position is batter's box, right? That guy just hits, and he hits it hard. And he hasn't done a lot of that yet, which, again, not concerned about the long term. I still think he's going to be fine. He'd be destroying AAA if he were down there. But it's a lot. It's a lot to catch up to big league stuff consistently. And I think a lot of hitters also struggle to find that balance between not striking out too much, but also making hard contact, right? It's hard to, very rare is the guy who doesn't strike out a lot, but also makes a lot of hard contact. Those are the superstars. Most guys aren't going to be like that. And, I think Keith and Merrill are both examples of guys who may have given up some hard contact to maintain the contact rate, which can be a deliberate approach, right? Just to keep yourself in the big leagues. Well, if I'm putting the ball in play, something can happen. If I'm striking out 40, 50% of the time, I get sent back to the minors like Jackson Holiday. So I can certainly understand that might be, in both players' cases, this might be a deliberate choice. In Colt's case, I just don't think that is who he is as a player in the long term. I mean, maybe 5 years from now, he becomes that player who doesn't strike out a lot, but has a lot of hard contact. I might actually say to him, hey, you know what? You're striking out. It's 18.3% of the time. Thank you, Baseball Savant. I'd be fine if you're striking out 24% of the time. Hit a few balls harder. Swing a little harder. It's okay if you strike out. That's a hard thing for players who've probably never struggled in their lives, who get to the majors and they're experiencing real struggles for the first time. That's definitely true of Keith. That is definitely true of Jackson Holiday. When the heck has that kid ever struggled? And I think it's hard. It's hard, especially on players, to not change because you're like, well, this isn't working. I got to do something. No. Just, it's going to take time. You're going to have to get used to it. But especially if you're in a situation where you're like, I might get sent back to the minors. I don't want to get sent back to the minors. Nobody wants to get sent back to the minors. So it's a challenge, and it's a coaching staff challenge as well as a challenge for the player themselves to make sure that these are the things that got you here. Keep doing them. This will work out over time with more reps and more experience.
Yeah, I think you layer on a pitcher-friendly ballpark in the early part of the season, too. That's a tough assignment. Like hitting in Detroit in April and May is challenging. It was also a pretty cool spring, as we've talked a lot about on this show. So you take that plus some other factors. I did actually hear, I was listening to the Effectively Wild podcast. They mentioned pizza cutter. Russell Carlton wrote an article about how a lot of the suppression in offense might be better positioned outfielders. So more fly balls just being turned into outs this year. And I had not thought about that at all. So that if you're wondering, hey, why this guy had power, he doesn't hit the ball into the ground too much. Like what's going on? Why is everything down so low? That actually could be part of the explanation. So something I got to check out in greater detail. But one explanation that I had previously not considered, with all the rookie hitters seemingly struggling, not all, we got guys like Colton Cowser and Joey Ortiz. You deserve some flowers for that one, performing really well. Interesting that both of those guys were up last year, kind of up and down guys. Now they're having success. I wonder if we're going to see some teams look at players like that and say, yeah, you know what? It's okay to demote players for a couple of weeks. It's okay to be an up and down guy your first year up on a good team. Maybe in year 2, everything will come together. The pitching has been really good. And it's not just Paul Skenes, but Paul Skenes could be a top 10 starter in Major League Baseball already, Keith. I mean, he might be that good. And it does remind
I think
me,
he is.
It reminds me of the Steven Strasburg arrival. After a handful of starts, you could just say, okay, yep, he was as ready as people said. And this is basically must-see TV every time he takes the ball. Yep.
I think he is more interesting. His arc from draft to now is more interesting than Strasburg's, because Strasburg was a 4-pitch guy coming out of college. He was as finished a product as a college starter as probably I've ever seen. Whereas Skenes basically did it with 4-seamer up to 102, but by his own acknowledgement, pitch didn't have a ton of life or movement, and a wipeout slider. And a lot of college hitters, if they didn't guess right, they would, you're trying to gear up for 102, and it's a slider that's like 6 feet away from you. You have no shot. And then he comes up with the splinker, which obviously everybody's talked about quite a bit. And it's, that pitch is filthy on its own. He didn't have it last year. I saw him at LSU. He threw one changeup and everything else was a 4-seamer or a slider. So he adds this splinker and he's throwing the changeup more, which people aren't talking about as much, but that's also useful because it gives him a real weapon against lefties. I think the splinker is also helping the 4-seamer become more effective. So now he's a real 4-pitch guy who's obviously got pretty good command, pretty good feel. We actually interviewed him on the show I do on the Stadium Network, and just hearing him talk about pitching, it's like, oh yeah, there's a lot going on up there. This is really good. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be that kind of guy to be a really good pitcher, but he is absolutely. Like, that is one of those guys where it's like, no, I needed to fix this tiny thing and I did it. It's, okay, you're terrifying. Also awesome. Good for the Pirates. So I'm all in. Like, I think, that now it's just one of those where it's like, oh God, please stay healthy as long as possible, because I would like you to have a really long, successful career where I just get to watch you all the time. Like, this is, to me, he's so fascinating because, he wasn't clearly one at the time of the draft. And the concerns were, one, he's a pitcher. He's a pitcher who throws super hard. He'd actually only had 1 year where he was that sort of pitcher after he transferred from Air Force. And he was a 2-pitch guy. It's like, well, he's going to have things he has to work on. And he just disappears through the offseason. He comes back. It's like, no, I'm done. What the heck? Who does that? And also, where did you go so we can send some other pitchers there to do the same thing?
Yeah. Yeah. We'd love to make more pitchers like Paul Skenes. That would be phenomenal. And even before the Skenes arrival, I think the arrival of Jared Jones and the success he's had, I know plenty of people here liked Jared Jones. He was someone that, talked about a lot last year, had a lot of success at AA, spent more of a season at AAA. If you just look at the full arc of Jared Jones's time in the minor leagues, improved control is one thing that sort of jumps off the page just by the number scouting. He's always been able to get whiffs. Swinging strike rate's consistently good everywhere. What do you think it is that's enabled him to become better at avoiding free passes as he's moved up? And seeing a career best walk rate from a pitcher against top level hitters is kind of mind blowing for me. I'm really impressed that facet of his game reached this level this quickly. A 6% walk rate in almost 75 innings. That's excellent.
Yes, it is. He's one of my favorite sort of scouting and development stories of the year, because, with all this talk in the spring about, we've got too many Tommy John surgeries. What are we doing wrong? Well, look, one big thing is we got to stop encouraging and incentivizing teenagers throwing as hard as they possibly can. Jared Jones is the old school. He threw reasonably hard as a high school prospect, but nowhere near as hard as he does now. He was very much we're going to take an athletic, projectable high school pitcher, and we're going to wait. We're going to take our time. And we're going to let him develop kind of at his own pace. And hey, a lot of really good big league starters have followed that path, and yet we still, in the draft, right? Who are we talking about going in the first round? It's all the guys who throw 97 at age 18. They don't all get hurt. I understand. I'm not saying that that's like, oh, you can't take the guy who throws super hard, but no, look for the other guys too. The guys who are athletes, the guys who have good deliveries, the guys who show real good command or have a particularly good secondary pitch. Love a high schooler with a great changeup. They don't all work out, but there aren't a lot of them, and they're pretty, that to me, that says something not just about their arms, but about their mentality and their ability to pitch, their feel to pitch. And to me, Jones is one of those, like, we want more of those stories, right? That's a great scouting and player development story where he got better in a lot of ways almost every year. You can see a lot of gradual progress. And then it was this year that he took that final leap, right? He's throwing harder, he's throwing more strikes. I think he looks a little stronger this year. I'd be curious if he actually put on weight or if this is just, I don't know, maybe big league cameras add 10 pounds. I don't know. Like just watching him, was it his first start? It was the start where he got yanked after throwing like 10 pitches. And they were like, no, you're done for the day. You know the one I'm talking about, where it's like, he afterwards, like, I don't know what happened. Yeah. But that was one where it's like, oh man, like I still have such a clear memory of seeing him in high school and being like, that's pretty interesting. I like that. I think I said he was a second or third rounder, which is, I think he went in the second round. Like, I didn't think he was going to become this, but it's like, yeah, this is a category of player that good teams, good player development systems want and work with. And, again, I can't praise the Pirates enough for what they did. And Pirates fans will tell you, we don't develop anybody. Actually, when you got two guys in your rotation, you develop pretty well. So maybe, give your guys a little bit of credit here. And Jones, to me in particular, is just, it makes me happy on like a fundamental level. Like, no, we can still do this. The old model of developing high school pitchers into big league starters in a way that not only helps them become successful, but gives them a better chance to stay healthy. That's still there, even if we're often sort of chasing velocity more than we should as an industry, or paying it more than we should, which I actually think is the bigger issue. If we weren't paying those guys more for throwing harder, they wouldn't try to throw as hard.
Yeah, that's very true. And if it didn't work, I mean, throwing harder gets you more strikeouts. Strikeouts get you paid. Like, it's the process too. This is an organization that maybe is turning a corner in that regard. I think Jones is a great example of it. Skenes seemingly has a little more on his own in terms of like what he did, the way you were describing how he came back this offseason with a better plan, more pitches, knowing that what he was doing in college wasn't going to work, right? I don't know how much credit the Pirates get for that, but I think they do get a lot of credit for Jared Jones, and deservedly so. But they have more on the way. They have Bubba Chandler. They have Anthony Solometo. They have Thomas Harrington. Things kind of look like they're trending in the right direction in Pittsburgh. And if they can become that sort of organization that turns out high quality starting pitching, that changes everything about their short and long-term future.
Yes. And I also think then at some point they're going to have to say, all right, we need to go get a bat. All right. Because that is one thing I would argue they have not done a great job of developing. And I think this crosses regimes too. this goes back to previous to the Ben Cherington regime, where they just have not figured out how to develop power, particularly. The previous regime really preached contact, and I won't belabor the point, but I do think it held back some of the prospects. They had some guys who never panned out, even guys like Brian Hayes, where this guy should have more power. He's going to be elite power, but he should have more power than he does. And, that to me, they may just have to go outside the organization at some point, whether it's trade or free agent. I can't believe I almost said that without laughing.
It's just not it's not something we've seen the Bob Nutting Pirates do.
No, he's got to cash those revenue sharing checks, right? It's a lot of work, man.
Long walk to the bank.
It is. Well, he's got to carry the suitcase full of cash up to Seven Springs Casino, I guess. They're going to end up at a point pretty soon. I mean, they're kind of in the wild card race now, because everyone is. You are, I am. Joe Sheehan wrote, I don't know if you saw his newsletter today. He's like, almost the entire NL is separated by like 2 games. It's ridiculous right now. Mm-hmm. So maybe this is their year. Maybe it's one more year. But at some point, they're going to have to say, we got to go get a bat. We got to go get a thumper for somewhere in the middle of the lineup. And I think that probably changes their outlook quite a bit. And they will, I think, have some pitching depth to be able to trade from. And Chandler is the one. I've seen Chandler, and he had a disaster outing about a month ago, and they skipped his next start. Wasn't serious, but I think it was a reset. Something didn't feel quite right. Now he's had 3 pretty good starts since then. I mean, the way the ball comes out of his hand, you've got to see the fastball. Like, it is. I mean, that fastball is. To say it has life is kind of understating. Like, it is teeming with life. It is crazy. And he's got a changeup that's really good. And he's got 2 breaking balls they think he's still trying to figure out. It's a lot of command and consistency. And for folks who don't know, he was both a 2-way player and a real 2-way prospect in high school who was also committed to Clemson, I believe, to play quarterback. So he came in, I think, way less polished as a pitcher. And it's almost like his stuff is just, I worry about the Tukey Toussaint problem where the stuff is so good and he just kind of never figures it out. He never manages to get the consistency. The stuff moves so much, but I always want players like that. And Chandler is one where it's like, I go see Bubba Chandler tonight. Yeah, I absolutely want to go see Bubba Chandler. It's not even to evaluate him. It's just because it's fun to watch what he can do with the baseball. And it's fun to watch hitters try to react to it. They're like, what the heck? How the heck that ball was supposed to be here and it's here? And I don't know what happened. Oh, by the way, it was 96. Like, he's pretty exciting. And to me, he's the one guy in that whole system of all those pitchers where I'd be like, no, we're hanging on to this one, but we'll trade it pretty much anyone else. They got some other guys. So you put another package together of some of their other guys to go get that thumper. I don't know. Pirates fans may disagree that that's what they need, but I think that's probably the best thing for them to go after. And it's also easier to go. It's hard to go out and trade for pitching. The price for pitching is always really high. Price for a corner bat with some power, can find those guys. They just have to get out of this Rowdy Tellez, Vogelbach, right? They need to go one tier up from that. Stop playing with those guys. They're going to have to put some money into it and say, all right, this is what we're going to do. Go get a guy where it's now power. And we're paying for him right now, even if it's a little more short term, which is just not the way they've operated as a franchise. This has nothing to do with any front office. It's just not the way the club's been run for about, I don't know, what is it, about 10 years? Might be a little less than that, but it's been a while.
Yeah, the Pirates caught a little bit of a bad break, right? I mean, they were, I think, knocked out of the wild card game consecutive years in their last 2 plate appearances.
Yep.
So they drew a short straw for sure, as far as getting to the postseason and being an elimination game right away and not having that work out. So their last window didn't bear much fruit. I guess the 3 consecutive plate appearances they lost in the divisional series in 5 in 2013 before 2 wild card exits in 14
and 15. The last 2 playoff appearances, they were one and done.
They're due to get back. If it's not this year, it's next year. And look, I think if you can only develop one of those things, developing pitching right now is the way to go, because you will find it easy. It's in bats, relatively speaking. I know everybody right now wants to pick the carcass, so to speak, of the White Sox and try to extract as much current talent off that roster as possible. Save those guys. Save Luis Robert. Save Eric Fetty and Garrett Crochet. Get them onto teams that could go to the playoffs in the next 2 or 3 seasons. Do you think Luis Robert makes sense for Pittsburgh? I've seen his name linked to pretty much any team in need of an outfielder. I just think he's intriguing because we saw the ceiling last year, but frustrating because we've seen the downside and the difficulty staying healthy, and the hip injury came back again this year. It's the second time he's dealt with a hip problem. So I can see the case for it, but it's an awfully high risk, high reward sort of player to go after, even though, with the player options on his contract, it's not at all cost prohibitive.
He's just going to be extremely expensive in terms of prospects. He's a fit for everybody, right? If you need a bat, he's a fit. He's going to cost a lot in terms of prospects, and he is injury prone. And there's some volatility in the performance, but I think you're just going to have to live with that. I mean, there's who else is really out there as an impact bat, particularly who's right. He has 1 more year. He's not a rental.
Not a rental. So that's why I think a team like the Pirates might be
more interested.
It's $20 million team options in 26 and 27. So
I'm sorry. He has way more control than I realized. I thought he had 1 year, and then so that's actually even more appealing. But also that's why the price is going to be through the roof, right? I think it was John Greenberg did a thing. I saw it was a video. I don't think he wrote it, where he was arguing that the White Sox should keep Robert in Crochet. And I'm like, no, you should trade those guys immediately. I totally disagree. Because first of all, Crochet has been healthy for 20 minutes Right? He's been one of the best pitchers in the American League right now. But, oh my God, this guy has already had serious injury history going back to before he was even drafted. So I absolutely am not banking on him. But also, Robert, he's a superstar when he's at his best and fully healthy. But there's volatility in the performance, and he's been hurt a lot going all the way back to the minors. It was a running joke with my readers where I never saw Robert get a hit in the minors because half the time I went to see him, he was hurt. I would show up at the ballpark and be like, why isn't he playing? Like, oh, he got scratched from the lineup because he's hurt. Or I'd see him go over. And I mean, obviously, but mostly that was humor. But the truth is he was hurt a lot, and he is likely to continue to get hurt a lot. So it's another one. I don't think he is in similar to Crochet. I mean, you're not building the whole roster around him. If you think of the rosters, you've got your core players, who you're absolutely building around, sign them to the long-term deal. They're there forever. He's in the next circle outside of that. Really great player, especially when he's healthy and he's on. But I don't know that you can bank on him to be healthy and effective for full seasons the way you might need an absolute core player to be. But maybe you trade Crochet, Robert, Eric Fetty, you would think would have a lot of value right now. And you get one of those core players somewhere in return. Maybe it's a prospect at that point, but somebody who could end up one of those core players for you. That to me is the approach that I would take right now. And could the Pirates give them enough for Luis Robert? I don't know. I wonder. I think the Pirates could beat a lot of teams' offers, but they can't match. This just came up the other day because I was on San Diego radio with Darren Smith. It was Padres are not going to match the Orioles, the Dodgers, the Mariners. There are a couple teams out there that have pretty good stables of high-end prospects where they could kind of beat any trade offer. I'm not. If I find out that Mike Elias is on the other line, I'm like, I fold. They just have got. They traded Joey Ortiz, who could. He's in the Rookie of the Year race in the National League. And I don't know if the Orioles have noticed that he's gone yet.
No, it has not impacted them in any meaningful way. I mean, with Jorge Mateo on the concussion IL for a week, I guess maybe that would have been a time where Joey Ortiz would have played a little bit more for them. But they've definitely benefited more from having Corbin Burns there than having Joey Ortiz. Has
worked out great for both sides, right? We love it.
Yeah, so far so good for both sides of that deal. Yeah, the Padres are pretty interesting because they don't necessarily have to shop in the most expensive bin, but clearly there's still interest in adding to this roster, and it seems like it's going to be more likely in the rotation if it is a somewhat splashy add. And they were the team linked to Crochet. The hardest thing about Garrett Crochet, though, where do you go with his workload? This is a problem because he's going to be 25 in a couple of weeks. You do think about his health today, future health. You do think at a certain point, you just got to let it happen as far as the workload goes. And I know there are tech-driven ways to monitor workload and fatigue. You can watch and see where velo and spin and different things are going. Mm-hmm. But what kind of 2024 expectation does a contending team have if they trade for Garrett Crochet? I can totally understand wanting to have his development in your own hands. If you want to trade for him for these next couple of seasons, you want to control what happens to him in 2024. But are you shifting him into a short relief role or a multi-inning relief role in August, just trying to keep the innings in the 120 to 130 range? And then you say next year he's a regular starter, and as long as everything's good, we're just not holding him back anymore?
So this may surprise people, but I am of the opinion that you are going to, if you trade for Crochet, this would be different for the White Sox, right? Because he is very much a long-term play for them.
Yep.
His contract or his contract status is a long-term asset. So if you trade for Crochet because you're contending this year, I would be inclined to say, and I think you handle, there's a way you handle this with the player and the agent. If you feel up to it, you're going to keep pitching. And I might say to him, look, we're going to put you in, we're going to guarantee some money. He's arbitration eligible next year, I believe, for the first time. So, we'll compensate him and say, look, we're going to, guarantee, or maybe you say we'll give you a contract that covers the next couple of years so that, recognizing that if the way we use you does result in some kind of, overuse or fatigue related injury, that you're paid. I mean, he's 25. He's already broken multiple times. I believe it was a shoulder issue in college. He had Tommy John and missed 2022. if your argument is, well, you can't pitch that much more than he's ever pitched before. Too late. He's already pitched more this year than he has in any professional season. He's at 75 innings now. He has never, that's 20 something innings above his previous high. It's more than he ever pitched in any single calendar year while he was an amateur, or at least in college. High school could be, but this guy broke a lot. So I would be of the opinion that if the player says he feels fine, if the trainers, doctors are like, he seems fine, you pitch him until he's like, all right, something's wrong. I feel fatigue, or you see the stuff start to decline. Then you back off, as opposed to saying we're arbitrarily going to say this is the number, the Steven Strasburg thing. Let's close our podcast where we began, right? On talk Steven Strasburg, where, to me, the idea that we're just going to say, well, he's going to get to 120, we're going to stop. Well, I mean, look, I can pull numbers out of that particular orifice as well, but let's not pretend there's any science behind it. That so-called Verducci effect turned out to be a whole lot of BS. There was absolutely nothing to back it up. And in this case, I would just very much say, if you're acquiring Crochet because you're contending, I would want to be responsible to the player too, but also say, we want you to pitch. And as long as you're good with it and your body is saying you're good with it, let's make sure we're all on the same page here, but we will allow you to continue to pitch. Maybe you pitch him a little less within games, but I do not like the idea of saying, we're going to bring you in, but we're going to shut you down. We're going to put you in the bullpen. But guess what? Putting a guy in the bullpen doesn't necessarily save anything, especially if he goes to the bullpen and says, well, I'm going to throw as hard as I can now. That's not the answer either. I would much rather say, we're going to acquire you with the intention of continuing to use you as long as it works for you, as long as we're not seeing deterioration in stuff or quality of stuff, and as long as you are not experiencing pain, discomfort, or fatigue, we can continue to pitch you. I'd say this very differently if we're talking about a 19-year-old amateur player, but Crochet is already paid something. And I would like to see in that situation, certainly if I were the GM, I'd say, look, let's figure out what your salary is for next year, and we'll just guarantee it. So God forbid you do blow out, you're paid no matter what. So you at least have that comfort level, and hopefully that gives the player more incentive to speak up and say, hey, my shoulder's a little sore. I'm going to need some time. Great. We're all on the same page here. We're working towards the same goal.
Yeah, you got to make it more mutually beneficial. I want to throw White Sox fans some reason to be optimistic, because it seems like it's just only negative. It's been a brutal season for them, and
it really has.
Those fans
hard to watch.
Better. I mean, look, you could watch Noah Schultz, right? Pull up MLB TV and turn him on, because
they freaking took him out of my league. I was like, when does Winston-Salem come through Wilmington? I mean, he deserves it. He's another one, man. If that guy stays healthy, because he finished last year on the shelf with a little bit of a tired shoulder. I think they handled that one brilliantly. And a buddy of mine who saw him earlier this year was like, this is some Randy Johnson-ish going on here. Like, he might be a top 20 prospect in all of baseball, which I think is about where I had him, actually, after doing that update a week or so ago. It's like, yeah, it's 6'9". The ball looks like it's being released about 2 feet from the plate. He's got the slider. He's got velocity. It's health and some, the little things you want these high school guys to develop. But credit to the White Sox, credit to Mike Shirley's scouting staff, all the way on up. That looks like an absolute home run of a pick for them.
Yeah, I wonder what it would take for them internally, as far as like seeing enough growth in their system from Schultz and a few other players to convince themselves that holding on to Crochet and or Luis Robert ends up being a good idea, right? Like, because of the distance in which you have them into the future is far enough where if you believe in your development, you could start to talk yourself into holding them if you don't like the offers you're getting from other clubs.
And would you agree, though, that I understand why you're grouping these guys together. I'm not arguing with you, but Robert is the guy you keep of those two. Like,
yes.
Crochet, just because he's a pitcher, because he's broken before multiple times. Like, Robert is the guy. It's like, if you said, all right, well, we want to keep one. To me, that's a no-brainer. And it's Robert, but then you could trade, and you got to trade Fetty, right? That is,
you have to.
The most obvious. It would be good for him too. Like, right? I'm sure he's pitching great, and this is such a great outcome for him, but also, like, who wouldn't want to contend at this point, right? Let me go pitch for it. Quoting Joe Sheehan again, he said in his newsletter today, he could start a playoff game. I was like, yeah, he could, for almost every club, actually, right? Which is funny to think it's a guy who basically washed out of out of Major League Baseball and had to go pitch in Korea, comes back a new guy. And actually, he'd be a 2 or 3 starter on almost every contender right now. So, maybe trading a Fetty gets you one more core position player to put next to Robert. They pick third in the draft this year. No, it's not third. They're sixth. Colorado's third. They're on some similar players. That's why I did that. But maybe you get another guy like that, right? You can see ways they can start to put those people can't see my hands, right? But you can start to put some of those pieces in place and fill out the roster. There's a way you can do that you keep Luis Robert. Of course, Chris Getz could also just say, I'll take offers on Luis Robert. I don't got to trade him. And that's the truth, right? Somebody wants to offer me the Herschel Walker package. Great. I'm all in. Love the 80s trade references. Wrong sport, wrong decade.
It works for a lot of people, though, because that was a franchise-altering move. And it would be that's what the White Sox need to do. They need a lot in one big move. They need their version of the Juan Soto trade. Like the Nationals are going to be back to some sort of competitive level a lot sooner because they crushed that trade. I mean, James Wood
crushed that trade.
James Wood, the best case outcome looks like it's starting to play out for him. He was another one of the risers in your updated rankings up to 5
because of what he did, right? Let's give absolute clear credit where it's due. Last year, as good a year as he had, there were clear deficiencies, particularly sliders in the lower third of the zone and below the zone. He is 6'6", pushing 6'7". He had a hard time covering the entire strike zone like a lot of those taller hitters do. Look at what he's done in AAA this year. You can look, especially if you dig into some of the StatCast data, because we now have that for AAA. I actually haven't seen him live. I've seen a fair bit of video. It's different. Like he has absolutely closed that. He's going to get to the majors. He's going to have to make that adjustment again, like we talked about at the top of this conversation. But I am so much more optimistic about his ability to make those adjustments. Everyone's like, well, it's Aaron Judge. Aaron Judge figured it out. Aaron Judge made those adjustments at every level. He would get to a new level. Pitchers would attack him in a new way, and he would make the adjustment. The good hitters do that. And James Wood, by moving up another level, he didn't even play great at AA at the end of last year. They moved him up to AAA. He made the adjustment. That says to me, that's a star. That he is going to be a star.
Yeah, impressive. I mean, with the K rate jumping up to 33% at AA, they recognized the adjustments, gave him the promotion up a level anyway, didn't make him go back to AA, especially given the age to level. They could have justified that, at least initially. And geez, a 56.9% hard hit rate at AAA this year. Yeah, that's fun.
It's loud. I mean, when he started the year in Wilmington last year, and I remember there's one game where I saw the bad strikeout because it was fastball up and sliders down, because that was the book. But he also hit one out that was like, I think that hurt my ears. Like he is just, and he can run. He gets consistently underrated for how fast he is. When he gets going out of the box, it is real. Like you're like, I didn't think someone that big could move like that. And I think he's going to surprise a lot of people. Even there are people in the national system who are like, we don't think he can stay in center field. And this is just opinions, right? I'm not burying anybody. I am not moving that guy out of center until he absolutely has to, because he can run and he gets good reads. I've seen him play really good defense in center. Like this guy's got a chance to be an all-around, both sides of the ball superstar. Good job by the Padres taking him, because obviously his long history, I was one of many people couldn't believe the money they gave him or where they picked him. And good job by the Nationals for buying in and saying, no, this is the kind of upside we can't get enough of. And that trade is it's a franchise-altering trade for them right now. It looks a tremendous return for the Nationals.
Yeah. And at the time when they did it and they were doing that teardown, I mean, they were criticized just because, hey, like what are you giving up? How are you giving away Juan Soto for anything?
For a bunch of prospects. Sometimes Bryce Harper was a prospect once.
I mean, I think they also just caught a team willing to give a lot of talent too. The Padres are a willing participant on the other side. There's so few teams that are comfortable making a deal like that. It's almost a perfect storm. And I've wondered for a while, like, would it be better to have a few more teams that operate the way AJ Preller does? Like the let's go, let's try. Like, because it creates something on the other end too. It creates action for another franchise having a willing trade partner that will do more than the typical team.
And whatever people think about AJ Preller, the dude wants to win. Absolutely determined to win. Can I do something today to make my team better? I'm not saying other GMs don't want to win, but he will, whatever it takes. And he is right there. It's almost like the inhibition part of his prefrontal cortex is just turned down a little bit. You can't trade those prospects. The hell I can't.
I'll just get more.
Yes.
It's a
good
mindset.
I want more. I want more executives like that. It's fun. It's interesting. If I were still a fan of an individual team, I would be very happy being a fan of it. Being a fan of the Padres right now, because look, if there's something AJ could do to make this team better, he's going to do it. He's going to be involved in every trade conversation. I might not like all the trades, but he's going to do something. I would rather that than the guy who doesn't make the move, right? The guy who refuses to, well, I can't part with these prospects. Look, you got to win. You got to try to win.
The windows are short. Got to do it when you can.
Absolutely.
Well, Keith, we really appreciate you joining me on the show today. Still out there on Twitter at Keith Law. You got a lot of great stuff coming up at The Athletic with the next mock draft dropping next week.
Next week. I think we're shooting for Wednesday of
nice.
Next week.
So about this time next week, we should have that available. theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels gets you a subscription if you don't have one already. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Thursday.